Hi, I'm Carol Beecham. Welcome to the Civil War Pensions Records class. The Civil War was the deadliest American war by far. It was estimated that around 620,000 men died in the war, but some experts claim that number to be as high as 750,000. So feel very lucky if you have a Civil War vet that lived long enough to apply for a pension. However, a lot of them were filed by their dependents. The Civil War produced the largest number of pensioners in American history, and first started being issued in 1862. Today I'm going to discuss the ins and outs of Civil War pension records and how to get them. Not all Union soldiers were eligible for pensions. Only units that were officially mustered into service of the U.S. were eligible. Not all pension applications were approved. Veterans and their widows could not always deliver the required proofs of service. However, they are still valuable, though. The rejected applications usually give more information because they leave bigger paper trails. Problems were bad for your ancestor at the time, but good for you as a researcher now. Pension records are a rich source of genealogical information. They're much more informative than many other records you will find. A veteran's application usually contains the veteran's name, rank, military unit, period of service, residence at time of application, place of birth, and mentions any property owned. Veterans had to justify their claim. He often had to list names of his dependents, such as his wife and children, including their birth dates and places of birth. There might also be medical information about the soldier if he was wounded or lived for a long time after the war. He had to include occupation information as to why he couldn't work and details of injuries. On the right side of the screen is a list of documents that might also be included in the pension record. I have found a lot of these documents listed in my own research with pension records. Veterans couldn't get a pension record if they had a desertion charge on their record. However, a desertion could be excused if he had a good reason. For example, if you were hospitalized when the company mustered out, only Congress can remove that charge. This is an example of one of the documents you might find in your ancestor's Civil War pension file. This is a certificate of disability for discharge. This one document gives me a lot of information, including place of birth, age, physical description, and occupation. It also tells me that he has been unfit for duty for the past 2 months. Pensions for Union soldiers first began in 1862. Soldiers who were disabled in the war were eligible for pensions. The amount depended on their rank and injury. Widows and children of soldiers who were killed in the war were also eligible. A widow's application or a minor's application will contain more information than just the veteran's one will. A widow's application will have all of the veteran's information plus her name, age, or date of birth, residence at time of application, maiden name, date of marriage, and veteran's date and place of death. She had to provide proof of marriage, such as a copy of the record or an affidavit from the minister or someone else. Pensions were revoked when a deceased veteran's widow remarried, but an act passed in 1901 allowed a widow who lost her pension to remarriage to start collecting again if her subsequent husband passed away or if she was divorced through no fault of her own. A minor's application may contain all of the veterans' and widows' information as well as the heirs' names, birth dates and places of birth, residence at time of application, and date of their mother's death. Children could get one if they were under 16 years of age. In rare circumstances, a soldier's parents could even apply for a pension if they were dependent upon his pay for their livelihood. The pensions filed by dependents will be really more interesting than just the veteran's application. This example was taken from a mother's pension application. This is one of those circumstances where the parent was dependent upon the soldier's income to live. She further explains in her deposition on the next slide of her dire situation. This is the testimony of Cassie Watts, mother of James Watts, who was killed at the Second Battle of Bull Run. He was very young and probably joined to support his family, but tragically lost his life doing it. The handwriting is hard to read, so I typed up part of it in the box on the right. She goes on to say that her son for 2 years, previous to his enlistment, had contributed entire proceeds of his labor to the support of herself and family. He would also send home his pay for her service in the Union Army. She says how she is unable to support herself and even mentions that her husband was in the War of 1812. All of this is great information, and how else would I have ever known it? This is just an example of the type of interesting and biographical rich information you can get from a pension record. I have numerous examples like this in my own research. If you want to learn more about your ancestor's story, look into their pension records. I can't guarantee that they will all be this interesting, but definitely check it out. Pensions were given to Union veterans based on various acts passed by Congress over time. In the beginning, the laws were more strict about who could receive a pension and who couldn't, but as time went on, the laws became more lenient and paid more money. Early pensions only paid $8 a month in the beginning, but towards the end, veterans or their dependents were receiving as much as $30 per month. The Disability Act, also known as the Dependent Act, was passed in 1890 and brought the single biggest change to the pension system. This even allowed veterans whose disability was not a direct result of fighting in the war to obtain a pension. If they were disabled and unable to do manual labor, they were eligible. This was important because most Civil War veterans were either farmers or laborers. Their inability to work meant that a pension was their only means of support. This dramatically increased the number of veterans receiving pensions. By 1893, there were more than 1 million men on the pension roll. There were other acts passed even after this one. In 1907, an act was passed that allowed veterans to receive a pension based solely on old age. Since not all Civil War veterans received a pension, how do you know if yours did? Well, there are indexes available. I have listed different options on the screen from different databases. There are other ones too, but these are the main ones. If possible, check both the indexinfo3.com and Ancestry or FamilySearch.org. These indexes also cover other wars, including Indian Wars, the Spanish-American War, and others. This is an example from the U.S. Civil War Pension Index. General Index to Pension Files 1861 to 1934, available on Ancestry.com. It gives his name and military unit. In this example, it shows that Stephen D. Watts, who was a minor, applied for a pension under his father's name. It shows the date of filing, the application number, and the state from which he filed. I can tell by looking at the index card that Stephen was not approved for a pension because there is no certificate number. If it had been approved, there would be one. Disapproved pensions do not have certificate numbers. You will need both the application number and certificate number, if available, to get a copy from the National Archives. Sometimes you can use the index cards to help you decipher if you are researching the correct soldier. A lot of times, there is more than one soldier with the same name and you don't know which one is yours, as was the case in my own research with Oliver Watts. By checking the pension index, I knew I had the right one because I recognized his son's name on the card and the state that it was filed in made sense. The same thing could happen with a widow's pension record. You would recognize the wife's name and know you had the right one. The National Archives in Washington, D.C. holds pension application files for all wars and conflicts prior to World War I. Union pension records aren't cheap. A complete pension can cost $80 up to 100 pages, or you can get what's called a pension packet, which is only $30. The pension packet is not the whole file. It contains 8 documents that contain genealogical information about the pension applicant, provided that they are in the file. I do not recommend this unless you can afford the full packet. The complete file will include additional documentation, including testimony from the soldier, physicians, neighbors, fellow veterans, and family members. Fold 3 also has the widow's pension online, but it is currently only about 21% complete. I have gotten lucky a couple of times and have been able to locate a widow's pension record here. I would encourage you to order pension records for all of your ancestors if you can. I ordered the pension records for my third great-grandfather's entire family. He had a lot of brothers that had fought in the war with him. I wanted to see what kind of effect the Civil War had on the family as a whole. It was really interesting to do that. Confederate pension records. The federal government didn't issue pensions to Confederates because they were the enemy. The individual states had to do this. Neither the federal government nor any state located outside of the Confederacy and its border states provided any benefits to Confederate veterans. Only states within the region bounded by Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kentucky, and Virginia provided any pensions to Confederate veterans. It was harder for Confederate veterans to prove their service to get a pension because many of them didn't have a compiled military service record. The absence of a service record doesn't mean he didn't serve. There are many reasons why he might not have one. For example, if he joined late in the game or served in a unit organized for only a short time, he might not have a service record. The Confederates weren't really into the record-keeping business as well as the Union side was. I would still check for a pension record even if you can't find a service record for your ancestor. Most Confederate states didn't have the money at first because they were broke from the war. Confederate soldiers didn't receive pensions until much later. Therefore, in order to apply for benefits, your ancestor had to live for a long time after the war. Each state started giving pensions at different times. Therefore, the eligibility requirements for each state were slightly different. The southern states didn't have a lot of money, so it was much more difficult for a Confederate soldier to get a pension. Widows typically received less than the veterans. If you were a deserter, you didn't get a pension. Most Southern pension systems started much later than the federal system did, but both systems were similar. At first, assistance was only provided to those disabled during the war at rates based on their degree of disability. However, Confederates were supplied with artificial limbs and Confederate homes were established early on. In the genealogy department, we have Confederate pension indexes for various states in book form that you can use if you wish. You can access many Confederate pensions through both Ancestry and Family Search. They have a lot of them online for multiple states. Confederate pension records are kept at the state archives. You can visit them in person or can order them for a fee. Thankfully, the Confederate pension records aren't as expensive as the federal ones. I have included the website address on the screen for a list of all the Southern state archives. The list gives you the website, address, and contact information for each repository. It also tells you what is available online concerning the Civil War military records. This is an example of a soldier's application for a Confederate pension. I'll have to say that I don't think the Confederate pensions are as informative as the Union pensions are, but there is still a lot of great information that you can get, as you can see in the example. The application asks 15 questions pertaining to his service, age, place of birth, residence, occupation, and whether or not he owned any property. Since there wasn't always a service record for the Confederate veterans, they had to find someone to vouch for their service by giving an affidavit. This was usually someone they served with. On the screen is an example of one. Sometimes you can find interesting things in a Confederate pension that you weren't expecting. This is a letter by the county judge of Camp County writing in support of Blackstock's application and explaining how hard it is for some Confederate veterans to obtain proof of service. This document was another surprise. From documents in his pension record, I learned that B.B. Blackstock died at a Confederate home, which led me to even more information. Here is a listing of the burial cost, which adds up to $100. That seems crazy cheap compared to today's prices. I have included all of these examples to give you an idea of the sort of documentation that you might find in a pension record. To conclude this presentation, I would like to say that Civil War pension records are always worth a look. Most of the Confederate pensions are free, but I would spend money on ordering the Union records over other records. They really are very informative. Happy hunting, and thank you for watching.